Yeah, my name's Timothy Hogan. I'm currently the Grand Master of the Knights Templar.
And there are about 3 million people with that 3 million Knights Templars
Worldwide, yeah.
Worldwide, yeah.
Right.
What was the situation like then between the Templar and the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, it was not great.
Yeah.
And it was understood that things would be turned over to the Pope, including information and that type of thing. And but they weren't turning everything over. And when the Roman Church figured that out, then all of a sudden the Templar Order became a threat.
Time to burn.
The order was created really as a means to go in and all that and to help secure
the artifacts
and get them out of there. Well, we know that there were several arks. I mean, most people think of the Ark of the Covenant, but we know there were several. There could have been hundreds of them. We have in our possession 6 of them right now that we had secured, mostly in areas between Jerusalem and Egypt, and then we brought them over here to the Americas at a very early stage.
Pre-Columbus.
Yeah.
You were traveling to the Americas.
Correct, yeah.
So you have the bones of Jesus Christ, Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, and their combined children.
Correct.
And how many children are there?
Well, there's 4
Okay.
total. Our hope is to release this stuff. They can undergo DNA testing. There's indication that the figure who was Mary Magdalene had been married and had children with both John the Baptist and with Jesus. And these bones were pointing to that idea, agreeing with that idea.
So describe the bones. Are there any odd features? Are there, what are the how do you describe them?
They do have some odd features to them, including the skulls have somewhat conical types of heads, and which has indicated to some degree that they could be, by some interpretations, somewhat extraterrestrial in origin.
You want to just maybe introduce yourself real quick, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, my name's Timothy Hogan. I'm currently the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, the order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, or OTSI, which is one of the lineages of Templar survival. There's several lineages that survived at different times, and some of them have joined back together again, and others work independently, but they form a kind of a loose federation, and so I help run that.
So there's different kind of divisions of the Knights Templar that exist around the world.
For sure, yeah. So after 1307, when the Templar Order was suppressed, they kind of spread out all kinds of different places, anywhere from remaining underground in Europe, in places like Germany or Portugal or Scotland, or even in France itself, Switzerland. But some people went back to the Middle East, to places like Egypt. Some Templars traveled back across the ocean to the Americas and just set up shop with. They had already been traveling there for a couple hundred years prior to Columbus, so there was relations already established with certain tribes, and they just kind of integrated into them. And they continue to save their practices, their rituals, continued to do their work that they were doing originally. And then over time, they kind of refound each other again. And, even though things hadn't been in a central hub, the pockets had all survived. And these pockets started finding each other again and then working together. And some of them remained like independent of their pocket, merged with other pockets. Now we have kind of a loose federation of Templar traditions that are all more or less dedicated to the same work and research. And a lot of that research is based on a belief, an understanding that there had been a pre-cataclysmic civilization that was very advanced, and when it collapsed, kind of the same thing happened. There were pockets that had spread, and so the Templar Order is just trying to bring those pockets back together and accumulate that research for the advancement of all of humanity.
We'll get back into kind of what those pockets, the beliefs that exist within those pockets of people, and what kind of connect them as a group. But the establishment of a head of the Knights Templar happened in the 1950s, I think you told me.
Yeah, well, what happened was so there was, about 1957, there was a push to start making things more public. And there was, the Grand Master before me was a man by the name of Raymond Bernard. And that's about the time he was made Grand Master of the Templar work. And he was in France. And out of him actually came a number of other Templar lineages, at different points since 1957. But then when he passed away in the early 2000s, I was already being developed here in the United States by the Grand Commander of North America at the time to kind of take over activities, and I eventually became the Grand Commander with the understanding that I would eventually take on that position. And so eventually I did.
The Grand Commander reports to the Grand Master.
Exactly, exactly. And there's different Grand Commanders in different territories. So like there may be a Grand Commander for North America, a Grand Commander for Europe. They all report to the Grand Master, and the Grand Masters all hold certain information related to their territories. And then the Grand Master kind of has the vision of the bigger order of what's going on.
The Grand Commanders hold the information on their territories, and then they report to the one Grand Master.
Correct.
That's cool.
Yep. And then his job is to pass that on to the next Grand Master, so they're aware of the bigger totality of everything.
And there's no term. There's no you can serve on this for life. And
yeah, in my position, and some of the strains, lineages that are out there, they may have like a position, equivalent to the Grand Master that only has a term of like 8 years or something like that. But it just depends on the different lineages.
And how many Grand Commanders are there that report up to you?
Oh, at this time there are 12.
And there are about 3 million people with 3 million Knights Templars?
Worldwide, yeah.
Worldwide.
But that's counting all the different Templar lineages out there. I mean, and there's a lot here in the United States, for example, more than in most territories.
What does it take to become a Knights Templar, to become initiated into to become knighted?
Yeah, so usually, there's a couple different processes. One is they can go through a school, like we've set something up called the Templar Collegia, which people can apply to. They can begin studying, and it'll take them through the fundamental study we feel like they need to know before they're knighted. That's one option. But then there's other schools out there too, or traditions and fraternities, like Freemasonry is one. You have to apply. They usually do a background check on you, and they'll do an in-person investigation. The lodge itself will vote on whether to initiate you or not. Assuming they do vote for it, then you go through a system of having different degrees communicated to you or performed for you that contain information that has been passed down over the centuries, and you're expected to retain a certain level of understanding of what was in that degree before you can move on to the next one, ultimately culminating in you being knighted as a Templar. So there's different ways you can do it, but they're all working towards the same thing, and they're all passing on similar information in that regard.
You're grooming someone right now. Is there succession planning? I mean, you've got someone in under your wing.
Yeah, I have several people under my wing that I kind of keep an eye on, and try to prepare.
And how were you selected?
Well, that's a good question. I was brought into this work at a very young age, at like 8 years old. And I didn't always understand or appreciate the history or the weight of what was being preserved. It's almost like I was, because I was presented to it at a very young age, it was just always kind of a part of my life. And it wasn't until I started reaching, college that I started like stepping back and going, wait a second, where's all this really coming from? And what's its utility and who's really behind it? And then I started asking the right questions. And from there, then I started doing a lot of research on my own and doing a lot of presenting, and that just got noticed. There is it may sound strange to some, but there is a doctrine, if you will, within the Templar tradition that is very much open to the idea of reincarnation. There are certain tests that we do, almost like with the picking of the Dalai Lama. Certain things are presented, and if you have a knowledge of those things on a level that most people don't, it usually implies that you had experience with that before in a previous incarnation, and you were prepared to take on the work again. So something like that I had to go through, and I will say that within our teachings, we also very much believe that you can prepare for your next life. So, for example, the Grand Commander who I was largely studied under was a man by the name of Dr. Onslow Wilson. He very much believed that in the future it would become necessary for him to reincarnate in China in order to help ensure that Chinese-U.S. relations in the future would be stable, to try to keep us from going to war, for example. And so when he passed away, I have no doubt he probably reincarnated in China and is growing up in China right now. And at some point in my life, I might have the opportunity to reconnect with him, and I will know him when the time comes because of certain ways we've set up to do that.
Yeah, reincarnation has to be one of the healthiest belief systems that exists out there, because it forces us to, if we know we're coming back to this place,
right,
then we're going to be
responsible.
Exactly. Yeah. I love it from that regard, and the
Me
sense
too.
of just peace and calm, and the sense that it gives you that it's going to be okay, and that it's just a transition as opposed to an
right.
end.
Yeah, it's like changing your clothes. One day you wear one outfit, the next day take on a new outfit, or you drive a car until it wears out, and then you get a new car.
I think maybe a good place to kind of start might be, well, first off, I guess, your family lineage, and maybe a bit. Your father was a Templar.
Sure.
You had a great grandfather 7 generations back that did some pretty important things.
Yeah. So my great grandfather 7 generations back was General Joseph Warren of the American Revolutionary War, and he was a Grand Commander of the Knights Templar, and he was very much involved in that process for planning the revolution. In fact, he planned the Boston Tea Party, so initiated Paul Revere, for example, and they used to work together, and he was very much committed to the mission of establishing this country as a free Templar state, is the way he put it. Templars have always tried to protect freedoms because they believe they are divinely within us already. And so that any government or governmental structure should be based on recognizing those inherent freedoms, having a soul, and from it devolving into tyranny. And so he was very much part of that. The Templar Order has always tried to set up laws and stuff that were based on that inner idea, which is why they They were very much involved in the creation of the Magna Carta, for example. They also fought a number of revolutions to ensure people had rights, God-given rights. So he was very much a part of that, and he died during the Battle of Bunker Hill at the American Revolution, and that was his...
What year was that?
I would say it was like 1774, maybe, 75, something like that. You know, it was just prior to, you know, us becoming free. He became kind of a martyr of the Revolutionary War. And then going kind of forward is going down. So I have the Warren side of my family and I have the Hogan side of my family. The Warrens, and that's why my name's Timothy Warren Hogan. But there's, for example, on the Warren side, my great-grandfather was one of the Grand Lecturers for the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania at one point in time, and he was also a Grand Commander within the Templar tradition. My grandfather, Hugh Warren, was had passed on all this tradition too, and he was involved in all this. He's kind of one of the people who really got me going with this in this life. And he taught metallurgy at Denver University, amongst other things. I mean, he was a very gifted person. And then on my father's side, my dad had gotten involved in it at a very early age. My grandfather, Howard Hogan, was also super involved in it. I have great-grandparents from Sweden who had been involved in it in Sweden, so like it was just like this total merge tradition from two different sides of the family who, and I'm the product of that. So
love it. Cool. Yeah. I mean, we could, I think, go a bunch of different ways. Well, important to establish right off the bat would be the purpose or the mission of the Knights Templar.
Yeah, so the main purpose is, well, the main purpose of the Templar Order is twofold. One is to empower individuals to be full persons, physically, mentally, spiritually, and the recognition that the divine spark, whatever you want to call it, is within everybody. Some Templar traditions refer to it as a sacred flame. Some refer to it as, just the divine spark or the inner fire. But it's a part of that God consciousness that's within everybody. And that balance comes from being in touch with that. The outer laws are created to be in harmony with that. And if we do that on the inside, then we can also create an expression of it on the outside. So as within, so without type of deal.
So God is within us.
God is within us, and that you don't need a intermediary between you and God. You need to pay someone or bribe them or whatever to like get there, right? Just by going within yourself. And the secret to doing that is really, it's about attuning with your heart and your conscience. And if you listen to that inner voice, it's usually resonating with what's going on around you. Act in such a way that you bring the greatest consciousness, upliftment to everybody involved in the situation. That's what it's all about. So that's on the one hand. The other hand, the Templar Order has done research for 1,000 years now, looking back at the ancient past, and they've tried to preserve, and some not so even ancient, but they've tried to preserve important artifacts and knowledge that we feel has the potential to help guide humanity into the future. to the place where we've been in the past before it all collapsed.
So I had always thought that there was a connection, and maybe there is, this is more of a question, between Christianity and the Knights Templar.
Yeah.
And when I first, I actually got your name as a recommendation from one of the subscribers to my channel. And so,
Nice.
And so when I first saw you and started researching you, the first thing that came to my mind was the Crusaders.
Sure.
You know,
That's everyone does.
Yeah. But it's nothing like that. Nothing like that.
No, I mean, there were Crusaders. I mean, the Templars were established around the time of the Crusade. The Crusaders would get out of control and would probably find artifacts and either destroy them or would turn them over to the church and they'd disappear. And so the order was created really as a means to go in and all that and to help secure
the artifacts
and get them out of there. And their doctrine, at no point were they ever traditional Roman Catholic like people think of with the Crusaders. I mean, the people who founded the Templar Order came from Gnostic background, and Hugh de Paynes, who was the first Grand Master of the Templars, he came from a Moorish Islamic background.
So no connection between that faith.
No, but unfortunately, when most people see a Templar Knight, that's what they think of. They think of, oh, these were Crusaders. You know, the Templar Order did get pulled into some of that a little bit just because they were in the territory. They were trying to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. That was their stated purpose, a bit of a cover. But they protected all pilgrims in the Holy Land. You know, if they saw a Muslim that was being abused by Christians, they protected him. Was being, abused by Muslims in the area, they protect the Jew. They thought that everybody had the right to worship as they choose, which is, something we find now with freedom of religion in the United States of America, but it's because Templars put that in there. That's what they've always been recognizing, with the belief that no matter what faith you come from, your faith is an extension of the culture that it came out of. But the root of those faiths usually came from a divine revelatory experience of somebody. And that divine revelatory experience is speaking to that inner connection to something bigger. And so it doesn't really matter the external form. What matters is that source.
And that's Gnosticism.
And that's Gnosticism. Right.
Yeah, so it's really hard for me not to go to the artifacts right now.
Fair enough.
And I'm not going to do it yet. Well,
okay.
we're going to get there. But that is mind-blowing, of course. And we're going to get to that. But I think that the probably the best place that we could start would be going back to the beginning, to Atlantis, to to pre-Diluvian, and kind of painting a picture of what that looks like, and sort of so your thought on that, your understanding of that, is that this was a Gnostic enlightened group of people that were living. Could explain what it looks like?
Yeah, I think we believe, based on the evidence, that the original, what we now call Atlantis, was more of a worldwide network, and that it probably had some bases of operation, that were kind of like their main hubs, but for the most part, it was a worldwide network. Not unlike you go around the world today, you see signs in English everywhere, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're kind of spoiled if you're an American and having grown up speaking English, because you can pretty much go anywhere in the world now and speak English and they'll understand you, because it's become the language of business, and even the street signs are in English and everything else, so it's very easy to get around. But that's because there was an expansion of globalism that was decided on at some point. The same thing happened with Atlantis. That it was a worldwide culture, and that in general the religious leanings or the spiritual leanings were more of a what we would call a Gnostic perspective now. This recognition that there was divinity within everyone. It's part of what allowed them to spread to these other territories and be accepted. And it was also what allowed trade and commerce and everything else, because there was mutual respect. And that has to start at the foundation.
And that would create peace.
Right, exactly. Something happened, though. Plato says that Atlantis became very prosperous, and that the people started getting greedy and kind of selfish, hitting those roots. And somewhere in there, they became sloppy, and they weren't paying attention to the natural order around them. And as a result, something happened.
The ego was created.
The ego was created
in some form.
Exactly. Yeah. And it became this absorbed monster. And it wasn't paying attention to its natural connections and the natural order. And as a result, cataclysm swept in. Some say it was a solar flare. Some say it was a comet fragment that ended up hitting the Earth. It could be a combination of the two. Sometimes if we go into an area of the universe or of the galaxy where there's a lot of cosmic debris, as that goes into the sun, it's going to be more fuel for the sun to release more solar flares. It also makes Earth more of a target for that debris. So, it could be a combination of the two, but
there's a tremendous amount of evidence for comet impact. I mean, the Comet Research Group has done incredible work on that.
They definitely see the impact areas for sure. And then also, the signatures that you would find within the strata, So I definitely believe it's that. The only reason why I even mentioned the solar flare is that some of the ancient myths seem to allude to that. And so it could be a combination of each. But what we do know is within a very short period of time, the ice caps melted. Any territories that would have been on coastal area, which would have been most of the world, became completely flooded. And in fact, you go to the bottom of the English Channel, for example, that used to be above land. Melting of those ice caps is what created the English Channel. And if you go down under the water, there's still the remnants of houses, at the bottom of the English Channel from when that all melted and that it flooded. And you find that all over the world. That's when the Mediterranean Sea was formed. It's when the Great Lakes were formed. It was massive. I don't think people can really appreciate it. And with those comet strike or those debris strikes, there probably would have been also the release of volcanic eruptions. Just from the mere, rocking of the Earth itself and the releasing of inner stuff, and that would have led to problems too. So, this is where we know civilization would have collapsed. It just so happens to be the exact time frame of when Plato said Atlantis had sunk. Exact.
100%.
Yeah. So, and we find, Plato referred to this civilization of Atlantis. That's what we call it. But we find myths around the world talking about the same place, calling it similar things. I mean, if you go to the Central America, the Mayan and other Nahuatl cultures, cultures that came out of the Nahuatl tradition there, they all speak of a former civilization known as Atlan, that also sunk beneath the waves and had this mass destruction, and they had to escape on boats. And it's not that much of a stretch between Atlan and Atlantis, So there's something to that, and And from a Templar perspective, I can say that, you know, I've gone over and met with several Mayan traditions down in the Yucatan and in other areas like in Guatemala. And I've been permitted to participate in their initiation ceremonies. And their ceremonies are they're like 85% identical to the ones we do in the Templar Order.
Really?
And that we've been doing. And in fact, the only reason why they let me witness them is because I was able to give them a secret handshake that we receive in our initiation ceremonies that they also receive in their initiation ceremonies. So it was recognized. And I've done that same grip with not only the Mayas, but the Hopi, American Southwest, with many of the tribes up in northern United States and in Canada, as well as with obscure groups in the Middle East that were preserving this information, and with Sufi traditions and even certain Kabbalistic traditions within Israel.
Sufi is the mystic version of Islam.
Of Islam, correct.
And this is essentially mysticism. I
right.
mean, yeah. And we'll get to the connections between the Templar and the Americas. I think that's a fascinating story. But that makes sense that it would have been passed down from generation to generation. Yeah,
and it was probably from Atlantis originally. You know, and when those pockets spread out, this is what they were preserving. And we were able, so we could find each other again, sort of.
The Younger Dryas and the fact that there was a cataclysm at that point just seems so overwhelmingly obvious and apparent given the data that exists now as it relates to ice core samples and as it relates to the black mat layer that we find all over the world. You know,
all over the world, right?
Murray Springs is a great example, but all over the world. And you know, the Meltwater Pulse 1A and Meltwater Pulse 1B from 12,800 and 11,600. I mean, this was a 1,200-year event of dramatic
Massive,
changes on the Earth. And as you mentioned, the sea level rise at that point in time is known to be extreme. You know, it has been rising for, I guess, the last 20,000 years or so. But the rise that we experienced during that period of time was unprecedented. Yeah. And then you think about the extinctions that happened of the megafauna all around the world. You know, went extinct during that time period, including birds. You know, birds, and so the explanation by mainstream academia of overhunting is just so ridiculous. You know, that nothing happened, nothing to see here, that all these animals were just overhunted. We went and slaughtered every you know, lion and bear and sloth and mammoth and every single one of them, down to the point of extinction across rugged terrain and mountains and woods and jungles. And
while people themselves were also disappearing.
Exactly.
Which doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And the fact, I'm going to call it a fact, that there was a cataclysm at that point in time. And it's just a question of whether or not humanity was established. I mean, there was a cataclysm. There was a very, very terrible time that the Earth went through. And was there a civilization? You're saying yes. You're saying that there absolutely was, and that they practiced Gnosticism and
And we also believe that they were, you know, we know they were, well, really what we believe. This is a belief at this point, right? But all around the world, you find these megalithic structures built with granite weighing tons, and you can see layers at these sacred sites where, like, there's a foundation that you can tell was built at one point in time using very advanced technology to even do this, and then there's a new layer where things were building on top of it. And what's happened is archaeologists have looked at the new layer and then just ascribed the entire dating of that new layer to the whole site. Whereas it's more likely that these people moved in, is what a lot of the cultures say they did. We just kind of ignore that. And but it suggests that the old layer was built by people who could do things that then the later people couldn't do at all.
Yeah.
So it suggests a devolution of technology.
For sure. All the older stuff is bigger, more complex.
Right.
Yeah, the huge blocks.
Exactly.
Yeah, and archaeologists have created that story because supposedly there were no ancient structures that existed beyond 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, because humans were hunter-gatherers. But then, of course, we discovered Göbekli Tepe from basically the exact same time as that Younger Dryas time period. At a minimum, that place is 11,600 years old, carbon dated to 11,600. So now we have evidence that there were humans at the exact point in time that you're talking about, at the exact point in time that Plato is talking about, that were building megalithic structures on Earth. And so,
in huge megalithic structures, I mean, like Göbekli Tepe is like 50 Stonehenges all put together, and then had been intentionally buried. And you have to ask yourself, why did they do that? So they were trying to preserve something, and they had the technology to do it.
So the cataclysm happens. Humanity gets thrown back into the Stone Age. So humanity, just as if the power grids, if the power grids were to go off today, we would be tossed back to the Stone Age. Our civilization would be over. Humanity would survive. We would survive in pockets, and over thousands of years we would rebuild. And what you're suggesting, and what many are suggesting, is that that's what happened after this cataclysm, and Atlantis was destroyed, and then humans rebuilt over a long period of time.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what happened. And then they tried to preserve the memory. There are many temples and monuments and things that people ascribe to one period of, like, the Old Kingdom or something. But it looks more likely that during the Old Kingdom, this is when they first discovered some of this, or rediscovered some of this stuff, and then they were trying to preserve it, and archaeologists there then will say, oh, this is when it was created, because they see the preservation work, rather than recognizing that, this was just a preservation effort to protect. I mean, the Egyptians recognized that it was far beyond their skill set, I mean, it'd be like finding a UFO in the desert, and then like trying to preserve it to ensure that, future generations would be able to appreciate it and maybe recreate the thing. But we couldn't do it now. So it's a similar mentality, I would say.
Yeah, and do you think that some of these underground tunnels, this might be a good segue into Egypt, but when you look at Darren Kuyu, when you look at some of the tunnels that exist underneath, the Step Pyramid and the Sphinx and that whole, Giza Plateau, do you think that those, at what point in time, I mean, was that people who were attempting to escape this catastrophic external above ground environment to survive from whatever cataclysm had taken place, that they were forced to go underground?
I think so. I mean, we know that there are miles of tunnels between Saqqara and the Giza Plateau, which is about 20 miles apart from each other or so. But then there's other areas like the Valley of the Kings, which normally we look at the Valley of the Kings and we think, oh, they were just building these tombs inside these cliffs, right? And then we're covering them over to protect them and preserve them. What most people don't realize is that all of those tombs are connected by tunnel networks underneath that area. And you have to ask yourself, well, why were they building tunnels between these tombs? That doesn't even make any sense. And there's such a sophistication in building those tunnels that it would have taken thousands of workers to even build that. And if they're trying to keep the place a secret, that would have been a horrible way to try to preserve it as a secret. So privately, there's whispers that even the Valley of the Kings was probably at one point in time, a survival shelter, and that's what these tunnels were. And that the later pharaohs, when they decided, hey, we needed to be buried, they wanted to be buried because most of the population had forgotten about these tunnels, because it's been, tens of thousands of years after the fact. The Egyptian pharaohs had been preserving a memory of them. And so they thought, okay, well, I want to be buried close to the people who were able to do things that we're not able to do anymore. So they started turning that site into a burial site from the pharaohs. But originally, I don't think that's what it was for. And the very fact that they carved it all out probably suggests that they, they knew the disaster was coming, right? They would have had to have carved it out before the disaster.
You don't think it was a scramble in reaction to, you think it was done prior?
Yeah, I think they knew it was coming. And they could have, if they had enough technology, they probably could have carved it out within a year or two, if they had enough workers to do it. But it still would have been a massive undertaking, and at a time when supposedly nobody had the technology to do that. So it's much easier to just tell the story of, the pharaohs, just carved out these tombs, later on, to hide themselves. But I don't think that's the real story.
And part of your point, I guess, is again, just to reiterate that if the kings were attempting to hide themselves, then hiring all of these hundreds of workers to carve all of these tunnels, how can you keep that a secret?
That's right. And why would you even carve the tunnels to connect you to other tombs?
Yeah.
That doesn't even make any sense. I think it's definitely a survival shelter type of deal. I think the same with the other tunnels that are under the Giza Plateau. There are and at Saqqara, there are places like the Serapeum that are part of that. Granite boxes that are, weigh 100 tons each, and they're carved with such precision. And this granite is carved with such precision that the ancient Egyptians didn't have the tools to even do that. They had copper tools, and copper tools wouldn't even carve that granite. So it suggests that those boxes were probably, when you put the heavy lid on them, they would have been hermetically sealed. And that was probably like an ark where they were preserving certain things through the cataclysm. And then they opened them up later, were able to take the things out. And then later, when the Egyptians rediscovered this site, they recognized, like, oh, this is really sacred. And they started trying to carve their names onto the blocks, and they started trying to, we know they were like eating the dirt out of there because they thought it was so sacred. But they saw it as a miracle. It kind of is. I mean, even today, it would be hard pressed for us today to carve those boxes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the fact that it was done way back, and I think the Egyptians discovered them, it really says a lot.
Yeah.
And this is in line too with, anytime you can carve this granite in that way back then, there's some technology being applied. And I know you have an appreciation and an understanding of some of this with the bowls that you have, these granite bowls that are carved out with such precision. We don't know how they did it. We don't know how, when, why, who, where. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, not for sure. We definitely don't know.
Right.
The granite boxes are incredible, and it's so your thought is on those that's where they were storing the arks in there. Yeah,
they were storing the arks in there. I think that
the Arks of the Covenant.
Yeah, and some of them, they opened up and they did find nothing but a white powder in there, and they just kind of dismissed it, And they found this at a number of Egyptian sites too, but I'm quite certain what this manna is this white powder is a manna, what we now call manna from the Bible, but it's a substance that the Egyptians later learned to create alchemically. I think it was a science from Egypt, because I've found several ancient civilizations now, including in China, in India, in Sumer, who were extracting this stuff, and they all called it by the same name, and it all had the same qualities, and one of the properties of it is it's somewhat superconductive. So you could use that for a number of ways, but clearly it was trying to be preserved in Egypt. either they were manufacturing it and trying to preserve it, or they were finding it and trying to preserve it. And they were placing it in their most sacred monuments. So they recognized the value of it. And so I think that's part of the technology of this earlier ancient civilization.
What is some of the other evidence that you see from ancient Egypt that strikes you as evidence of ancient civilization or ancient technology?
Well, you find drill marks in the granite in different places. You also find cut marks, which would have had to use some sort of a diamond-tipped drill. There's evidence of circular saw cuts, not to mention just the weight and the movement of some of these stones. I mean, we know where the stone came from. A lot of it came from the Aswan quarry, and most people think of it like, oh, well, they just would, they cut the stone out or the obelisk out, and they would just take it on down to the Nile and then just ship it on to wherever down the Nile. Mm-hmm. But it's not that complicated, or it's not that simple, because, and actually in order to get to the Nile from the Aswan Quarry, you have to go over a mountain range. So that's the first problem then, is how do you get it up over the mountain range? Second problem then is, how do you get it on the boat without the boat sinking? And then even if you figured that out, then how do you get it out of the boat once it's in the water?
Right.
And I mean, these are the things that people aren't really thinking about.
Yeah, the granites is one thing, but even when you look at the limestone blocks that make up the Great Pyramid, or any of the pyramids, and 2.4 million limestone blocks that each weigh a couple of tons.
Right.
And there's this famous video with these guys trying to show that, we can cut these, and there's two guys with a saw, and they're going back and forth on it, and I think they get 2 millimeters in about 4 hours, of cutting these massive limestone blocks, and it's like, well, yeah, that's how they did it, they sawed these blocks, and then they figured out how to move them. We still don't know how they moved them, but to make a 2 or 3 millimeter progress over the course of a couple of hours, and to say that it was a job that was completed in 20 years,
absurd.
It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. And then when we see things like Ganton Brink's door and some of the mysteries within the pyramid that also just don't make any sense. It makes you wonder. Let's come back to Egypt in a second. Let's get to since I mentioned the Ark of the Covenant, because I think that fits into the pyramids. But so I want the audience to understand those, and potentially we'll start there as it relates to the artifact, and then maybe cover the bones and some of the other artifacts later. But can you paint the picture of how the Knights Templar came about possessing these artifacts, which you've seen clearly with your eyes.
Yeah, we have. So we believe, we know that there were several arks. I mean, most people think of the Ark of the Covenant, but we know there were several. There could have been hundreds of them. We have in our possession 6 of them right now that we had secured, mostly in areas between Jerusalem and Egypt, and then we, brought them over here to the Americas at a very early stage.
Pre-Columbus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were traveling to the Americas.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So we have those currently reside in vaults, and we're aware of where 4 other arks are at this time that we're trying to get to. That said, these arks were created for a very specific purpose, we believe. They were basically like natural electrostatic capacitors. They build up static electricity from their area, over a period of time, a few hours to a few weeks. And then what would happen is it would start to discharge through the top of the ark. And this is why you couldn't touch the arks without getting electrocuted. Even the Bible talks about that. The only way to touch them or to open them would be to take something like a rod, like Aaron's rod, put it in the ground, and drop it against the ark, and that would discharge the electricity into the ground, and then you could actually touch it. When we understand this, coupled with the fact that even the Bible refers to a pot of manna being placed in the ark, well, no one ever asks, well, why did they put a cup of manna in there? Everyone assumes it's like, well, it's because that's what they were eating when they were wandering the desert. But we understand what this manna is, and it's a superconductive substance that can be extracted out of nature. Platinum metals can be turned into it. And because it's superconductive, if you put that into the ark, it would just create that much more electrostatic potential. We think this is why even in the Bible it talks about Moses erecting a tabernacle in the wilderness with wool curtains, which would have added to the electrostatic capability of these arks. And it just so happens that the outer size of what's described as the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible just happens to be the same dimensions as the inner dimension of the so-called sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid.
King's Chamber.
The
Yeah.
King's Chamber, the Great Pyramid. And the pyramid itself is an electrostatic capacitor to a certain degree. I mean, if you were to stand on top of the Great Pyramid with a wine bottle with a wet rag on it and hold it up, sparks will start shooting off just because it's collecting that static electricity from the desert. But then also the granite blocks and the pressure and everything causes a piezoelectric response. So if you were to put an ark in there with the manna, the superconductive substance in it, the pyramid would become this generator that would just broadcast electricity in the region, much like Nikola Tesla was trying to create with his Wardenclyffe tower. I'm from Colorado, so Colorado Springs is only about an hour from me, and the place where Tesla was doing all those experiments is well known and appreciated there. But if I think a similar thing was being done, not just with the Great Pyramid, but with other pyramid structures around the world. And this was part of the technology of the Atlanteans. And this would explain why there are all these arks. We found arks in not only places like Egypt, but they're also valued and celebrated even in ceremony in places like Japan. And you have to wonder, well, why? Where did they come up with the same design and the same? Why are they celebrating it? Same within the Americas. So, it suggests that it was a part of a worldwide technology, a worldwide network that got shut down during the cataclysm. Probably people started melting down the gold and stuff for other purposes.
Sure.
But that these arcs are part of the preservation of this world grid electrical network that was just based on free energy being produced from the earth itself.
So many questions. So would they need to be in a pyramid in order to be activated, or in order to produce energy? No,
they would produce energy anyways.
Okay.
I think the pyramid just helps broadcast it in the region.
Okay, and so these artifacts would be over 12,000 years old.
Correct. Yeah.
And you've personally seen how many of them?
6.
6. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're at spots all over the world.
Well, they came from spots all over the world.
They came from spots all over. Are they collected now into one area?
Yeah.
Okay.
The 6 that we have are in vaults here in the United States. 2 vaults in particular. The other ones that we're aware of are in areas that one is being preserved in Ethiopia. There's one in Jordan. and then there's 2 that are kind of buried, one that's still in Egypt at this time. And I should point out, too, by the way, that part of the reason how the Templars came across this was, they found one of these arks in Jerusalem, but then there was indications that there were others. And they started going into Egypt, and these arks are depicted on all the major temple walls all over Egypt. In fact, there's a great scene if you go to Dendera. There are 2 staircases in Dendera, one that's going up and one that's supposed to be going down, up to the top levels, right? And if you go on the one going up the stairs, and it kind of winds up, you'll actually see carved on the walls these depictions of Egyptian gods and pharaohs carrying one of these arks, and you can see their eyes are always on the ark as they're carrying it, and you can see which direction they're going, that they're heading up because of the direction of where their feet are, right? So their feet are pointing up, and they're carrying the ark in front of them. Well, then on the staircase going down, you see that their feet are facing down because they're walking down, but their heads are like 180 looking behind them at the ark, so as that they're carrying down. So it's like in both scenes they're emphasizing the importance of this ark. And we found other examples of this all over Egypt. One of the ones that, from a Templar perspective, that's significant is there's a room at the Temple of Seti I, in Abydos, that's closed to the public at this time. We can get in there, but it's, and Egyptian antiquities can get in there, but for the most part, it's closed to the public. And in this room, which is right by kind of the back way that goes into the Osirian, that's right behind the temple, there's a room where there's a depiction of the ark in a couple different places. One is it's undergoing transportation by the Egyptians. Another is it's just in place. And it shows not only the ark, but it shows these white cakes, which we believe is this manna that went inside the ark. You always see the white cakes together like a cone shaped. See them together with the ark, and you see the pharaohs offering them in their hands, and they're completely tied together always at every temple. But at this particular one, at Seti the First, you'll see an ark, and then you'll see Templar graffiti of 3 red Templar crosses surrounding the ark, like they're emphasizing, like, okay, this is where we found this one here. And in that particular room was also almost like a laboratory where they were extracting, the Egyptians were extracting this. What they were doing is they were pulling materials up from the Osirian, which is just outside the door.
Right.
And they were taking those raw materials, they were bringing them back into this room, which was basically like a lab. And this is where they were extracting that mana out of that material.
Okay. And
clearly it was going into these arks so they could be utilized
by the Egyptians.
By the Egyptians.
Okay.
Which was I think it was a rediscovery by them, or I mean, it's possible.
Or the knowledge passed.
The knowledge was passed down. I mean, there is evidence all throughout Egypt of knowledge being passed down from an ancient time, where the pharaohs were trying to preserve the knowledge of things that they couldn't do anymore. I mean, there's depictions on the temple walls of blocks being levitated, of even temples being levitated, which obviously, the Egyptians couldn't do that we're aware of, or maybe they were able to in a limited capacity. There are also depictions, for example, at the Valley of the Nobles that depict these red-haired, bearded people that are white, and they're very clearly depicted as white because they have other races depicted in the scene too, and they have giant sloths and woolly mammoths on leashes. That they're like baby woolly mammoths on leashes that they're moving, and it's being depicted on this temple wall or on this this tomb wall. Well, it's like, well,
those went extinct during the Younger Dryas.
those went extinct during the Younger Dryas. So clearly they were trying to preserve the memory of what had happened before, and this pharaoh was incorporating it in his tomb to try to preserve the memory of it so that people in the future would be able to say, okay, this guy died at this time. He's depicting things from a much earlier time, which proves that the Egyptians were trying to preserve the memory of things that had happened before.
Okay.
Or at least the pharaohs were.
Yeah. So if there were, you've seen 6 of them, and are they largely intact? Are they, okay, so they look essentially as if would they still be operational?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think they would be, right? I mean, we don't have them set up to do that.
Yeah.
We got them under the ground in a an area just to preserve them. But I would have no doubt if you were to take them out and put the lid on and put some of that mana in there,
they would still work.
They would still work. Maybe even put a catalyst in there like pomegranate juice or something like that. You know, within the space of several hours, it would start to build it all up, the static electricity again. It would start to discharge it.
Can you describe in detail what it looks like? What are the various components of it?
It looks very much almost identical to how it's described in the Torah or Old Testament. It's a box composed of multiple layers of wood and metal. I don't know if it's acacia wood or not. That's how it's described in the Bible. To be honest, I don't know. But there are these multiple layers to the box. And then there's the lid on it, and there are winged figures on the tops that I think that's where the discharge occurs, right? It's between the wings. And, that's what the Hebrews were mentioning as this presence of God showing up there, right? In the area of the mercy seat.
Okay.
It was really, that was the discharge point.
Okay.
And some of them, most of them are gold, but we do have a couple that are made out of silver, what looks like silver.
On the outside? Or?
On the outside, yeah.
Okay, so the outside layer would be gold on most, and then a couple of them are silver on the outside.
But there are layers on the inside, too. I mean, so that the final layer on the inside is also the same metal.
Like box layers?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, almost like it's just, there's like a couple different layers.
Like a box within a box, kind of?
Like a box within a box.
And could you take a box out? Or
No.
Okay.
I think they're all kind of together. Yeah.
Okay. And there's what's the opening? What would the lid look like, or how would that work?
The lid is it just places right on top of it, almost like very much like if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know how that lid went on top of the ark, and you didn't want to remove the lid because that's where all hell was, would let loose. Pandora's box, you know.
Okay.
But it was I don't think it was like that extreme. I think it's more, the purpose of it was to put the mana in there, which was super conductive and just to help it with its process.
And then wood, it would be carried by wood beams, is that right?
Yeah, just with rods.
Okay.
And there are like loops, or it's almost like a shower rack. You know what I mean? These loops on either side where a rod could go through it.
Okay.
Traditionally, they were depicted as 4 people carrying an ark, one on each corner. But the amount of metal and wood that's there, each of these arcs weigh several tons. Some of them, the winged figures on the top are a little different, but for the most part, that's exactly what it's like. And I think, so if you bear with me a second, there was a practical application for these, which was this. You have to remember even Solomon's temple. The temple was built to store the ark, and the ark was built to store the mana inside of it, right? So it all goes back to this mana, which we are certain we know the alchemical process for extracting it, but which is something that has also been passed down by different ancient cultures. And the process is the same. The substance that comes out of it is the same, which again implies that they all inherited it from some previous civilization, and they're passing it on. But if that mana, I think, we can only speculate, but I think it was really set up to, have a practical purpose to it, to generate this electricity.
And do you think that any of these, so if the Catholic Church obviously would have found out about these and known where they were, they would have taken them into their possession and they would have kept them completely? Do you think that they've done that? Do you think that they have a handful of those in the Vatican?
It's quite possible. It wouldn't surprise me. Again, every indication suggests that there were hundreds of these things at one point in time, and that they just now, we have 6, but there's no reason to suspect that there's got to be more out there. We just haven't found them.
And you're going to release this information publicly.
Correct.
So part of the process of coming onto this show is to kind of prepare for that and to make it so that it's not as shocking as, people are on information overload these days. You get a whatever, we can have the biggest news in the world and it's like completely over people's head because it's such information overload. So what you're attempting to do is get the story out there and then ultimately to release this information publicly. Yeah,
so that way people aren't as, they're going to be more open to what we have to show. For some people, like very devout religious Jewish people, for example, the idea of multiple arcs might seem heretical, because they've been conditioned to think that there was one Ark of the Covenant and that was sacred and that held the God's laws in it and this pot of mana, and that's it. So even to say that, well, actually there are probably hundreds of arcs, that's a hard pill for some people to swallow. And we don't say it because we're trying to invalidate people's faith. We're just trying to say there's a little more to it, and that these arcs probably served a practical purpose in the past. And you know what? To be honest, there's no reason why we couldn't implement that type of system again in the future, right? We can actually create these arcs, and if you got enough of them up on the based on this world grid, and put them in the right places, you probably could generate enough electricity that's just kind of broadcasted that you could power the earth that way, naturally, without using fossil fuels to do it. And it would work to a limited capacity. And it's good for us to not only recognize that the ancients probably did that, but that's something that we can still utilize to this day. Right.
Tesla tried that, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. Got shut down.
Got shut down, yeah. So speaking of getting shut down, with this knowledge and with this information, and we haven't even gotten to the bones yet. But do you are you taking precautions? I mean, are you, do you fear at all that some highly right-wing, religious person could want to stop you prior to having this information released?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you look back at like the conquistadors that came over, they were looking for gold, in general, but we also have to remember who they were working for,
right?
At the time, which was very much the Roman Church. And it's quite possible that the leaders of those conquistador units were looking for these artifacts. And that's part of the reason why they were suppressing the natives in the region, because they knew they were over here somewhere, and they just didn't know where. Even Columbus, when he came over, he flew the Templar crosses on his sails, not because he was a Templar, but because he was trying to fool the natives who he knew had already had contact with the Templars. So he was trying to impersonate them so that he could get information out of them. And that is always a risk. It has been since the beginning. And
right, yeah, it has.
Yeah, I mean, the only solace is, I mean, if they were to pick me off, they wouldn't be able to find the vaults. I mean, so
yeah. How many people know about the location of the vaults?
Very few.
Okay.
Very few. I mean, there is one of the vaults is in a fairly public area. These people don't realize it's there. And then because it's been there for so long, before it became a public national park area. And then the other vault is on a particular Indian reservation.
Okay.
And the natives there have been preserving it and protecting it ever since. And that was based on an agreement between, the Templars and the natives long ago. And that has, preserved ever since.
All right. So, yeah, there's a lot there. What about the bones? Let's get to the bones.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we acquired in our digging back in the early 1100s was we came across a tomb in East Jerusalem area. It's now referred to the Talpiot tomb. And inside of it, we found several ossuaries. Well, an ossuary is like a box that contains bones in it. And what they used to do is they would take a person who died, they'd put them in the tomb for a certain period of time till their all the flesh material and everything would rot away, and all that'd be left would be these bones. Then they would prepare the bones and they'd put them inside the box and then seal it up. And the last thing they would put in there was the two femur bones and the skull, which is really where the skull and crossbones symbol comes from. But the order found these bones in the clear back during the time of the Crusades, and the ossuaries themselves seemed to contain, well, they had names on them. And they were names like Maria Magdal, Yeshua, Jan. And the indication was that these were the bones of Mary Magdalene, Jesus, John the Baptist, and their children. And I say their children because there's indication that the figure who was Mary Magdalene had been married and had children with both John the Baptist and with Jesus. And these bones were pointing to that idea, agreeing with that idea. So what the order did at the time is they just removed the bones. They left the boxes, they left the tomb.
Okay.
And they just removed the bones and took them also to the New World.
Okay. And this was the 1100s?
1100s, yeah.
Okay. So the boxes still remain in Israel.
Well, they did until recently. Now, I mean, they eventually the boxes were rediscovered and taken out of that tomb, and now they tend to tour around with the Dead Sea Scrolls on the Dead Sea Scroll exhibits.
Okay.
So they also include these boxes, you know.
So you have the bones of Jesus Christ, Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist,
Right.
and their combined children.
Correct.
And how many children are there?
Well, there's 4 total. They may have had more children. We don't know, you know, who went to other areas and could be buried elsewhere. Yeah, our hope is to release this stuff. They can undergo DNA testing. We just don't want them to fall into the hands of any one religious sect.
Right. Everybody claims Jesus.
Or any one government. Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, right now you can't even, if you discover a shipwreck, for example, from the 1400s, you know, you have Spain or Portugal or whoever trying to claim it, and then you have the country where it resides trying to claim it.
Right.
And, you know, everyone's trying to get a piece of it. So,
can I trade you a couple vases for like a pinky bone or something?
I wish I could say yes. I'd rather have your bases than the pinky bone, you know, but yeah.
That's a no then.
Yeah, no, unfortunately. I mean, we don't feel like we feel like we're custodians of these bones.
Yeah.
They don't even belong to us. You know, we're just trying to preserve them. You know, so they don't disappear, so they don't get.
And are those bones with the arcs?
Yes.
Okay. And are they at the Indian or are they at the
both?
Both. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So they're spread out.
They're spread out. Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't want to have everything in just in one place. At one point in time, we had 7 vaults, and most of that stuff was then consolidated into 2 vaults right around the time of the American Revolution. In fact, Oak Island, the Oak Island mystery, that was one of the vaults at one point in time. But everything was moved out of there by 1765 in preparation for the upcoming revolution that they're planning.
Okay.
So they may find still a few coins or a few things there at Oak Island, but the big stuff was all moved out.
Okay. And so when are you going to release this information, and why wait?
Yeah, we're hoping to release everything within the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. And that is based on 2 factors. The first is, again, we're trying to get this information out so people aren't shocked when we release it. They'll understand the significance and the whys as to why we are having to preserve it to begin with. And that, so they'll also be comfortable in re-examining their religious texts that they've been conditioned to believe a particular way. And now they'll be able to see it from a different perspective. That's the one. But then the second thing is, part of the reason why we're releasing it now is that our world is a mess, and we are killing ourselves, and we're killing the natural order, and we need to start switching to new ways of doing things if we're going to survive, quite frankly. And some of these artifacts point to a different way of thinking that can help foster that. And so, yeah, that's the main reason. And now we have the technology too to release it worldwide instantly,
right?
And have people see it, right away. Yeah. Which we've never had that technology before.
Yeah. Here's my concern. Have you seen the movie by Jeremy Corbell where he highlights Bob Lazar? And it's
I'm familiar. Yeah, for sure.
UFO flying saucers and something. Yep. Bob Lazar is talking about owning some exotic material in that film. And during the creation of that film, not once it aired, but during the creation of that film, the FBI and a bunch of other groups of people swarmed his house and just started, going crazy and just digging through all of his personal collections and attempting to find what he had been talking about. And so they are obviously listening to him and listening to, and so when you say 5 or 10 years, that's a long time for you know,
potentially.
Yeah. And it makes me feel like, is it really going to happen? You know, is some government, if somebody, is somebody going to, you know, potentially go and try to find these things and dispose of them prior to that? You know, is that a concern?
It is. I don't think they'll be able to find it though.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, if you know, we recently had a show on Gaia, Mystery of the Knights Templar, and we pointed out other Templar artifacts around the country that have been discovered, or monuments that were created. And if you pay attention to some of that and you do some calculations and you pay attention to some of the things we said, you could probably figure out the general area of where one of the vaults are. But unless you knew exactly where it was, I think it'd be a little hard to find it. I mean, not impossible. I will say, for example, Thomas Jefferson, when he purchased the Louisiana Purchase, and then he sent Lewis and Clark on their expedition, you know, one of the things that their job was to do at the time, we're quite positive, was to go check on one of these vaults that was, I mean, within 20 minutes hike from where they were. Mm-hmm. You know, so if knowing that, and even in their diary entries, they talk about going someplace for a day, and it's very ambiguous, you know. But they were 100% sure they were going to check on the vault, make sure it was still there, and report it back to Jefferson, who was a Templar. So, I mean, you could find it if you. It's not like Lewis and Clark had ever seen the vault before, but they were able to find it. So if you just give the general location area.
But the Native Americans are there must be at least a few of them who know where it is.
Yes.
And the government is actively involved with the Native American, and that does that give you any concern?
No, because the natives who know where it is are also very respectful of the tradition and the history and their sacred duty to protect it. So I'm not worried about it.
Okay.
I think it'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay. But then why wait? You know, why, like, I mean, just to hit that question one more time, you know, I mean, why the technology's there. It could be a worldwide announcement. You could start the DNA testing immediately and not give up the location of the artifacts or the bones necessarily, but just begin testing on just a pinky, you know, just just something. Why not? Why not?
Again, people aren't quite ready there to appreciate what it is, I think. I mean, it's different when you have you give somebody a new cell phone or something where there's all kinds of gadgets on it that they can play around with and come to understand it and appreciate the technology behind it, even if they couldn't create it themselves. But with this other stuff, you're talking about influencing people's beliefs that they use to guide their lives with. And it's very hard for some people they'd much rather believe the story than the truth. And for some people, you know, we know that it doesn't matter no matter how much proof we show them, they're still going to be they're going to believe what they want to believe, you know, and they're not going to change their opinion. And that's okay. We don't need to change everybody's opinion, but we do need to ensure that a certain amount of the majority is on board with it if we're going to start to implement it again as a worldwide technological opportunity.
Okay, so you're seeing the decline in Christianity and belief systems in general over the last several decades have really seen a decrease, and so you're seeing that trend happen, and you're seeing what you're saying to yourself is, as that trend continues to happen, the world is going to be a more open-minded place, and the world will be ready to understand and appreciate what you have to share at a later point in time.
That's right. Well, and people are getting more technologically savvy.
Yeah.
Too. So that's the other side to it. I mean, you can go to third world countries and you'll see them selling cell phones, you know. So people are more open to technology now. And so we think this will actually serve in our advantage, you know, to get people to recognize what it is we're sharing with them. Because otherwise it's just a box, you know. I mean, the reality is these boxes there's nothing that special about them. It's just they're made with precious metals, and they serve this function. And but we can recreate that tomorrow. You know, there's another part to it too that I think is a symbolic aspect.
But you can carbon date the wood.
You can carbonate the wood for sure.
Boxes, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's there's the technological application. There's also what the Ark represents. So when you consider how these ancient temples were built, even Solomon's temple, the description of Solomon's temple, they were built in such a way that they represented the human form made into a temple structure. So where it would be the head of the temple is usually where the sanctum sanctorum is. And inside that sanctum sanctorum is where this ark would have been placed. So if we were to map it onto the human body, the Ark of the Covenant was placed at the area that we now recognize as the pineal gland of the human head. And from a symbolic standpoint, from a Gnostic standpoint, that area represented, this was where the receptor was to allow you to attune to your environment. We believe that the crystals in the pineal gland are really like receptors, not unlike a crystal radio receiving kit. And that they're picking up on these signals, and that it's that particular area which allows us to attune to these deeper frequencies. And this is why, since the Ark was also placed in that location in the building, it was described as a communication device with God, right? Because it's basically serving a similar function to what our pineal gland does.
Okay.
You know, and so there's layers of meaning here.
Yeah.
And until we understand those layers of meaning, we're not going to fully appreciate what it is we're looking at.
Yeah.
And so part of shows like this is getting that information out there so people will have an appreciation when it's revealed.
So describe the bones, if you could, and then we'll move on from that. But if you could give me, what are there any odd features? Are there, what are the how do you describe them?
They do have some odd features to them, including the skulls have somewhat conical types of heads, and which is indicated to some degree that they could be, by some interpretations, somewhat extraterrestrial in origin. And of course that raises a problem for many people, because A, they don't want to believe in extraterrestrials to begin with, and B, to think that the guy that they could be praying to or worshiping was an alien. That's a whole nother can of worms to open. You know, I mean, we're getting to the point now as a society where we're open to this idea of not only UFOs, but that they could potentially be coming from other star systems, other extraterrestrial sources, and coming to this planet. And if there's enough data to support that, then at a certain point you have to be open to it. And that's why the military is now openly talking about UFOs where they didn't before. There's enough data out there now to support that lots of people are seeing these things.
So the general shape then of the head, and is it which of the skeletons possess this conical shaped head?
Well, certainly Jesus and John the Baptist ones do.
Okay.
The Mary Magdalene one does not.
Okay.
Though the children seem to have a indication of it.
Okay, so not as pronounced in the children.
Not as pronounced, right.
Okay, so Jesus and John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it more of because there's two ways. I mean, that shape of a skull appears on skeletons of humans, and certain tribes can wrap their heads and create that. But then there's also a different, what we might imagine as having a larger head that's not kind of squeezed through a wrap, but that's more of a round basketball type looking thing.
and this one's more like the former that you're talking about.
Okay.
And the indication for the heads that were wrapped, you need to ask yourself, well, why were they wrapping? Yeah, just like this.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself, why were they wrapping their heads to begin with to do this? Unless they were trying to mimic something that they had come across that they saw was special, that was like that.
Mm-hmm. But you think that they were wrapped as opposed to that they were born that way?
No, I think they were born this way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they were born this way.
Okay. And what about is that your gut, or is there something about the skull and the shape of the skull that makes you think that they were born that way?
They're a little bit bigger skulls.
Okay.
Than a typical skull that you would expect from that period.
Okay.
And there is the skull itself, the back of the head, which is more conical, but it appears that was part of natural growth and not from wrapping.
Okay. What about eye sockets?
Eye sockets are pretty normal.
Okay.
To be honest, yeah.
Okay. Fingers, toes.
Yeah, there's no indication of 6 fingers or anything like that. Okay. I mean, it's pretty. The rest of that's pretty normal.
Okay, pretty normal.
From what we can tell.
Right? Yeah, pretty normal. Other than the skull. Okay.
Right, and we're hoping that first of all we can establish with the genetic sequencing we can figure out who these people were within our vault. But then we also hope that the fragments that we tested could correlate with the fragments that other people have tested, mm-hmm. including from the Talpiot tomb recently. And if there's a match, then it proves that these bones came from that tomb, first of all. And second of all, it suggests that these bones are different from normal human bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense.
So, yeah.
So when the artifacts were they were discovered again around what year were they discovered?
So they're discovered near 1100. I mean,
okay.
So 1118 is when the order was officially there, starting to do digging, basically.
Mm-hmm. And they were kept for about 200 years then?
Yes. Well, so what happened was, by 1160, most of the stuff in Jerusalem had already been discovered at that point, mm-hmm. which included not only one of these ark boxes, but also the bones mm-hmm. in East Jerusalem, as well as a number of clay jars where there was scrolls found within them.
Okay.
And these scrolls comprised apocryphal texts of the Bible. There was also some scrolls. It's not unlike when they discovered the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt or the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they'd been found in these clay jars. It was a similar thing.
Okay.
In fact, and some of the scrolls they discovered comprised what was to later be known as the Zohar, within the mystical Jewish tradition, the Kabbalistic tradition. It was the bare bones of the Zohar, which were then added to, I guess, to create the text as we know it today.
Okay.
But even according to standard rabbinical teachings in history, there's this story that there were Islamic workers who were serving under Templar guidance who discovered these clay jars, and when the Templars opened it up and found that there was Aramaic on them, they knew it was close enough to Hebrew that they needed to find Hebrew scholars to figure out what this was. And the Jewish scholars were like, oh, this is a new type of text. And they, instead of like just hanging on to them, or instead of turning them over to the Vatican, what they did is they gave them to Jewish communities in Spain to then translate. But they had to, what they did is they transported them on Templar ships, and they had Jewish scholars with them to take them to the communities in Spain. And then they were published by the same publishers that ended up publishing the book Parsifal, which is one of the Holy Grail books, at the same time, which says that the Templars were the guardians of the Holy Grail.
Yeah, so paint a picture for me, if you could, of the, I guess it's the 1300s. Yeah. And so when you guys, I say you guys, but you're the group that you're part of, your ancestors and your, when they were escaping from the the Catholic Church,
right,
and they were boarding ships, and they were bringing the artifacts back to America.
Yeah.
What was the landscape like there, and what was the relationship like with the Catholic Church?
Well, so we were coming over to the Americas as early as the 1200s. There were, and most of the artifacts were being moved between the mid 1200s and the mid 1300s.
Okay.
And during that time, while most of Europe was just doing its own thing, Templars were coming over. They were establishing relations with the native tribes. They were mapping all of North America and even part of South America. They were going down. They were setting up bases of operations, in places like Panama, and colonies, creating colonies in these areas.
And the Perry Reese map is a Templar map. Perry Reese was a Templar.
Perry Reese was a Templar. You remember the order was based out of Constantinople, and that's where Perry Reese was also based out of,
which is now Istanbul.
Which is now Istanbul, and he was he was a general, or an admiral, I should say, within the Ottoman Navy. But there was a lot of crossover going on there at the time, and research being shared, and institutions that were already established in Constantinople that were being preserved and protected by the new power structures that were coming in. So there's a lot of stuff going on, dynamic stuff going on at the time. But Perry Reese, he even said that he developed his maps from earlier maps that he was copying from.
Right.
And some of these earlier maps were maps that were within the order's collection at the time.
Okay.
That they had attained through a number of different places, both from Viking connections all the way down to things that they found in Egypt. And, they were trying to compile this information. There are temples to this day in Egypt that show Egyptians, for example, meeting with Mayans. And they depict Mayans, and they talk about the lands on both sides of the water. And there's even a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that's dedicated to a Queen Maya. That's literally the name. And if you go in it, there is Mayan art depicted in the tomb. So there were these connections, and there's these memories that were being preserved in different ways. I think that's why even the boats that were buried at the base of the Giza Plateau, those were boats that were probably used to travel over to North, South America, Central America, the Americas, by the Egyptians, and they brought them back and tried to preserve the memory of it.
Down the Nile, through the Mediterranean, and
exactly.
Across.
Yeah, I mean those boats were more seaworthy than what Columbus sailed on. So I mean, why wouldn't they have? That's not what's taught as traditional history, but it's very much there. And there's other circumstantial things in Egypt, like they've done tissue samples of some of the mummies, and they've found evidence of cocaine and tobacco in the tissue samples.
So that's how that would have come back.
That's exactly how that would have come back.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then the Templars in their travels also tried to preserve hints of knowledge of where they were. I mean, a good example is you go to Rosslyn Chapel. Everyone thinks of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland as, they know there might be some Templar association, but they look at it as this obscure pagan art thing mixed with Christian symbolism, and there's lots of weird foliage carved all throughout it, and they don't really think much about it. Well, on some of the windows at Rosslyn Chapel, I'll tell you a secret right now that, to my knowledge, has never been on a podcast before or on anything. One of the windows of Rosslyn Chapel, the window is flanked by American corn, which, carved American corn and aloe cactus, which, only grows in the New World. But even beyond that, what it's growing out of, if you look at the corners of the windows, there's Mayan step pyramids carved there.
Wow.
Well, Rosslyn Chapel was completed by 1420.
Wow.
Which was, 50 years before Columbus ever even sailed over there. So, and it's clearly, if they're marking a Mayan pyramids on there, well, what does that tell you? It tells you that the Templars who were sailing over there had come across these things already, and were cataloging it, and we're trying to preserve a memory of it. So, and there's other things there too. I mean, there's several different types of flora that just all come from the New World. That's the only reason why they're there. They're being carved there. It's a marker to let people know, okay, yeah, we were there. Here's some evidence of it.
So a lot of evidence of travel between back and forth in that couple of 100-year period.
And it's also why when Columbus first went to, you have to understand, Columbus, he suspected that there was land on the other side of the ocean. There was talks of it. And even he went and he pulled out one of the Grand Master's daughters out of a convent, one of the Templar Grand Master's daughters out of a convent, and he married her to try to get information from her. He got maps from her. And then he went to Portugal and was like, hey, hire me. I know there's land on the other side of the Atlantic. Hire me. And they're like, no, thanks. We're good.
Slow down.
Because like they already knew about it.
Yeah,
They're like, why would they hire this guy? You know, like,
okay.
I mean, what purpose would that serve them or anything? You're some loser, you know, who was like, you know, trying to get in on the goods. So they said no to him. So then what did he do? He went to Portugal's enemy, which was Spain. And he went to Queen Isabella, who was had just kicked out all the Muslims and kicked out all the Jews out of there and was turning it into a Roman Catholic state. And he said, hey, hire me. I know where there's lands on the other side. And he probably suspected that's where these artifacts, these religious artifacts went to, which the Roman Church was looking for at the time. And so she was like, of course, you know, this will add glory to my empire. It'll, you know, I'll find the artifacts. It could help the church. Of course, here, we'll give you money. Go for it.
Wow.
And so Christopher Columbus, then he put Templar crosses on his sails, specifically so that when he came to the New World, he knew that the natives would recognize him. Well, they'd recognize the symbol, and that he could deceive them to then try to get what he was looking for, and you know, the rest is kind of history there, unfortunately. Yeah, but even Scotland itself, you know, most people don't realize that Scotland received its name from a queen known as Queen Scotia, and Scotia was an Egyptian princess who was said to have traveled from Egypt to that area, and that's what Scotland's named after. Well, we know that that princess was the King Akhenaten, the Pharaoh Akhenaten's daughter, and Akhenaten was you know, he was a very strange pharaoh. He's the one who first declared monotheism in Egypt. He was he had one of these coned heads.
Right. Very pointy features.
Very pointed.
Head, yeah.
Right. I mean, he was Tutankhamun, King Tut, was actually, his original name was Tutankhaten. In fact, on his throne it says Tutankhaten because he was from that same tradition as his father, Akhenaten. So,
interesting.
And Nefertiti herself, who was Akhenaten's wife, was there are statues. The crown that she's wearing isn't even an Egyptian crown; it's a Mayan crown. And there are Mayan statues down in the New World that look just like Nefertiti, wearing the same crown and everything. And it's probably because she was a Mayan princess who came, was brought back from the New World and married Akhenaten, and one of their daughters ended up Scotland's named after now. So like, I mean, that's all connected. Yeah, it's just not, and the Templars made the connections. It's just people aren't used to looking at it that way because they've been conditioned not to look at it.
But Akhenaten was what? He was 1400 BC or something like that.
Correct.
But we're saying AD is when the Templars were traveling.
Correct. Yeah, because when the Templars went down to Egypt, they started rediscovering all this stuff, and they discovered the maps and stuff to go back to the New World. So they started going back there again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And even Akhenaten, and during his time, they were probably rediscovering what had once been much further back, prior to the Younger Dryas. You know, there was a tradition being passed down that this is the way the world is. You know, this is the number of continents. In fact, the Zohar, which is that Jewish text that I talked about that the Templars found, it mentions that the earth is round and that there's 7 continents and that there's, you know, the light shines differently depending on where you are in different parts of the world. And I mean, all of this very knowledgeable stuff that supposedly nobody knew back then, which even suggests that the Zohar itself was trying to preserve knowledge from the ancient pre-Diluvian times. It just had other religious drapings put on it, you know, with time. And so as the Templars discovered all this stuff, they started putting the pieces together, and then they realized, okay, this is how we get back over there. And then they did, and they started establishing relations. They even after they were suppressed, they found sanctuary in places like Portugal, where they then created. Portugal was the first Templar state, really, in Europe, where they can keep doing operations, you know. And this is why when Columbus,
back and forth between America.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Portugal became known as this famous seafaring
port
area. And
so the Bubonic Plague.
So one of the theories with the Bubonic Plague is it wasn't really the Bubonic Plague as we know it. I mean, it was at the same time that the Templars were making these travels over to the New World. Unfortunately, they were encountering new diseases that they weren't immune for, and vice versa. They had diseases that the natives didn't have, weren't protected from. And when the Templars started coming back, you know, and this is through the 1200s through the mid 1300s. When does the Bubonic Plague break out? Right at the same time, right? It just decimates Europe, and unfortunately, that was. We believe it probably had less to do with the Bubonic Plague and more to do with people not being prepared for those diseases.
Right.
And that's what was really wiping everybody out at the time.
So we think of it as it's just the Europeans who brought disease to the Americas.
Right.
But what you guys understand is that the Americas brought disease to Europe.
That's
in the
exactly
form
right.
Of the Bubonic
Via the Templars coming back into Europe.
Well before Christopher Columbus.
Well before Christopher Columbus.
That's incredible.
And there was also, if you look at the records of the mummies and the bodies and such, the bones that had been found of natives from that time period, they were also going through a disease pandemic, and it was probably, unfortunately, from Templar interaction. You know, I mean, that was never the intention of the Templar order, obviously.
Right.
You know, but I think some of that did happen.
Yeah.
And I think it wiped out Europe more than it ended up hurting natives here, because the natives were more spread out. They were more, each tribe was more isolated. Some of them were more nomadic. And so they just weren't affected by it as bad as these established cities in Europe, where it could just spread like wildfire. Yeah.
So again, the primary purpose of the travel to the Americas by the Templar, I mean, of course, it got to the point where they had to escape at some point, you know, and I want to talk about that, but also establishing their system of understanding, called a belief system, called a system of understanding within the Americas. So establishing a new Atlantis, essentially, in a more enlightened, kind of less belief-based culture. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. Yeah, they wanted someplace to establish a free Templar state, which they also referred to as the New Atlantis, or sometimes the New Jerusalem. But it was a place where ideas could flow freely, where the expressions of the human soul could be celebrated, and that freedoms would be there, you know, for people to thrive. And the United States became the perfect establishment for that,
because the native people already were kind of more there, right?
They were already more there. In fact, even our system of government is largely based on the Iroquois system that had established, where they had several different, I wouldn't say states, but there were territories or different Iroquois tribes that all met and had a common type of government. And so people like Benjamin Franklin and others looked at that and said, oh yeah, this would make sense in terms of how we do our own thing with the, our different state territories, and how that could all apply and still be overruled by a overarching philosophy,
Yeah. So when push came to shove, when they were exiting, when they were heading to North America for the last time, in the last kind of trove of people to leave.
Right.
What was the situation like then between the Templar and the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, it was not great.
Yeah.
The Templar Order, they were accused of several things. They were accused of heresy because they were believing in doctrines that were outside of Catholic dogma. They were also associating with all kinds of different groups that the church had deemed heretics, and the Templars had no problem associating with them because they recognized that divine spark within everybody. So that was a problem. There was the fact that the church was privy to the fact at this point in time that the Templar Order had secured these artifacts and other texts and things that were contrary to Roman dogma, and they didn't turn them over to the church. So, hence, when the order was suppressed in 1307. And Jacques de Molay, who was the Grand Master at the time, was burnt at the stake in 1314, along with several other Templars.
For heresy, essentially.
For heresy. The
ISIS is doing that today.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, because Roman Catholic rule has for so long influenced public opinion and conditioned people, there's this myth that was created at the time that the Templar Order ceased to exist by 1314, when Jacques de Molay was burnt at the stake, and that he was the last Grand Master, and that's the end of it. The truth is that was the end of Roman Catholic patronage, right? Because there was this period between 1118 and 1314, where the Roman Church was providing patronage to the Templar Order, and the Templar Order was working for the church somewhat, but they didn't have to answer to anybody in the church other than the Pope.
Okay.
Right? So they kind of had their own system going, and it was understood that things would be turned over to the Pope, including information and that type of thing. And but they weren't turning everything over. And when the Roman Church figured that out, then all of a sudden the Templar Order became a threat.
Time to burn.
Right, because they had information that could destroy the conditioning that the church at the time was trying to put on the people.
Right.
So they became a threat at that point. And so when the Templar Order went into hiding, it was more, they were trying to preserve their own membership. They're trying to preserve the doctrines that they had found. They were trying to preserve the idea of these freedoms, but they were also trying to preserve the artifacts, and it was all about preservation and survival. And so they did manage to survive in a number of ways, including one of the things that the Templar Order had for centuries was, they weren't just knights on horseback running around. They had sea captains, they had farmers. Farming was a huge part of the Templar Order. They had clerics and scribes that would try to copy doctrines. They had a close relation with the Cistercian order, and so they were turning certain texts and stuff over to the Cistercian order, who they were working with. But then they also had a whole section of the order that was stonemasons, because they were building not only fortifications, defense fortifications for people for themselves across Europe, but they were also building churches and chapels. And they were the ones that started to build the first cathedrals of Europe.
Okay.
And so part of what they tried to do is they tried to preserve this knowledge that they were getting onto these cathedrals in Europe. Right under the nose of the Roman Catholic Church, not realizing it. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church was just like, hey, look at this great new church that they built for us,
What are all these pretty symbols?
Right, that are the center of town, and
right.
it's like, oh, this is great, look how great this makes us look. We're the center of everything. It's just played to their ego, but contained and hidden on that was this sacred knowledge, knowledge of not only sacred geometry and sacred architecture for the building of these things that had symbolic meaning, but then also literally in with the depictions of the Bible, the scenes from the Bible all over the churches. They also threw in knowledge of alchemical knowledge, Kabbalistic knowledge, Pythagorean knowledge, so that it would be preserved. And so that anyone who took the time to actually study the building could come across this knowledge, and that it would be preserved for antiquity.
And what are some of the more famous sites and structures and chapels and cathedrals?
Well, I mean, certainly Notre Dame of Paris, Amiens Cathedral, Chartres Cathedral, Saint Sulpice Cathedral, the cathedrals at Strasbourg.
Okay. And they're all just littered with
this esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even go to the front doors of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris without seeing these, right at eye level. There's these. They're not exactly statues, but they're more like carved imagery of very obscure symbolism. And most people don't even stop to think about what it is. But what they are is they're depicting all of the stages of the alchemical process. Right there at the at the front doors of the cathedral. I mean, so if you look at this diagram, if you look at there's these figures, you see these figures, and right below them is where all these depictions are of the alchemical imagery, and so. And they depict things like salamanders on fire and people with standing next to athanors, which are alchemical ovens, and I mean, it's just, and if you know what you're looking at, it's very clearly being outlined. And this is the same processes that the Templars were encountering in the Middle East. These communities like the Druze and the Sabaeans and others were they were the first to be translating and preserving Greek and Roman texts on alchemy, which were an extension of the Egyptian texts on alchemy, and which were ultimately those processes are the same processes that we find in other parts of the world, again suggesting it was this part of the science of Atlantis that these different cultures were preserving.
And what is the significance of the salamander?
So salamander, for example, is a good example. Salamanders are always depicted in fire, right? And so people think of them as this lizard that lives in the fire. But to the alchemists, this was the symbol for secret procedure of the word salamander could be broken down into sal, which means salt, and mandra, which means stable. So what they were saying is if you're going to extract the stable salts out of something, or which was also called the mana of the thing, you had to calcinate it down with fire. So you burn it down with fire, then you're able to extract the salts out of the ashes. So that was one of the fundamental stages of the alchemical process.
Okay.
And they recognized that there were two different salts that you could extract. One which was this mana, the other which was certain minerals that could be and compounds that could be extracted from that plant. And depending on the plant, for example, if you were to use acacia, which is a very popular plant that grows in the Middle East, you do that process to it and you extract out the salts. The stable salts are the mana, and then the unstable salts or the soluble salts are in fact DMT.
Okay.
Right? So between the two of those, you have both a psychedelic and you have something that's a superconductive substance that not only heals the body, but you put it in one of the arcs and it produces a tremendous amount of electricity. So both of which were things that the Templars were fascinated with.
Okay.
So
yeah, interesting. So that building style, and do you see the crosses also in ancient, not ancient, but in very old cathedrals and
yeah. In fact, all the cathedrals you'll find the Templar cross because they were helping. They built those cathedrals. They started building those cathedrals. I mean, you go to Saint-Germain Cathedral, which is one of the oldest. The earliest maps of Paris actually show Saint-Germain Cathedral, or possibly where Notre Dame de Paris is. It's right in that area. The oldest maps of Paris show that area is where there was an ancient temple of Isis, which is pretty interesting. Again, tying in with that Egyptian connection. And so that's where they chose to build the cathedral. Interestingly, these oldest cathedrals also have what are known as the Black Madonna statues in them. The Black Madonna is it's like the mother and child but they're painted black.
Okay.
And people have always wondered, what is this? How come these Black Madonnas are in these crypts of the cathedrals? And it's because those crypts are at the early foundation of the cathedrals, which is usually the site of a pagan site where, the Templars were studying where these ancient pagan sites were because they were tied into an earlier rural grid network, they believed. And that the Madonna and Child was just a replica of when the Templars were stationed in Egypt. They had their main commandery was at the Temple of Isis at Philae. And in fact, if you go to this day, you'll see Templar crosses carved all over the temple because that was their base of operations. Okay. Later, Coptics came in there and they used the same cross as the Templars, the equal armed cross. So, they started carving some in there too. But ultimately, at the Temple of Isis, there used to be a statue of Isis and the young child Horus, that were made out of black basalt that was on the main altar there. And on the walls are also depicted these images of Isis and the young child Horus. And so, the Templars were exposed to that. And they were like, okay, well, let's bring that image back to Europe, which they did, and they started putting them in the crypts of the cathedrals as a reminder of where this tradition came from. And then the Catholic Church took that iconography, and then they just made them white, and turned it into Madonna and Child that we everyone's familiar with now. Right. So, but it originally came from those images of Isis and Horus that the Templars encountered at their commandery at Philae at the Temple of Isis.
Wow, fascinating. So what is the evidence in North America for the arrival of the Knights Templar prior to Columbus?
There are several sites around North America where there are Templar carvings of, there's something called the Overton Stone, which shows a Templar cross next to tobacco leaves and corn. I think it was corn. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, wow.
So, Yeah, I mean, this was like a truce stone related. So you have a feather and you have tobacco leaves, right, which clearly represented the native stuff, and then you have the Templar cross there, and it was a treaty that was going on between the natives and the Templars,
wow.
at the time. So there's the Newport Tower, and it was a Templar construction, 100%. That'll be proven more and more in the years ahead. Different archaeologists have looked at this and said, "Oh, it's a windmill," or "Oh, it was a," there's all kinds of weird. It was a lighthouse. It was a. I mean, people have tried to be making up excuses for it ever since it was found.
And where is it?
Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay.
But it was actually built as it was a Templar construction, and I will tell you, there are there are windows in it where the sun comes in at certain hours of the day, and they can light up certain things. And one of the things that it lights up is a particular keystone. And if you follow the way the light lines up with it to that keystone, and you look out the window that's above it, that points in a particular direction, and where it takes you to specifically is a artifact that was known as the Kensington Runestone that's in Minnesota. Well, the Kensington Runestone is a stone that it's written in runes, but it is there's a code within it that points to its Templar origins. And the work of Scott Walter was fundamental in discovering this. And he did a fantastic job of proving that. Well, there is more to that line that aligns with the Kensington Runestone. It goes further up near Canada and unto Montana region. And it's pointing to some very significant things that will be revealed in the years ahead.
Okay.
So this is another one of these artifacts that was proven to be legitimate. People are trying to link it with the Vikings. Do you remember the word Viking just means pirate in the Nordic language? That's all Viking means, is pirate. And there was a very close relationship between the Templars and some of these Viking traditions.
Okay.
And these seafaring pirate traditions, especially after the Templars were suppressed and had to become pirates, trying to attack back at the countries to get their artifacts and such back that from the countries who hired them to begin with. So there's a connection there. There are other artifacts around North America, though, including there is it's up near Nova Scotia. They discovered a carved wood figure. It's only about maybe 3-4 inches tall.
Okay.
Of a Knight Templar.
Oh, really?
There it is.
Okay.
It even has a little cross on its chest carved.
Okay.
And that's the traditional Templar dress from the 1200s, which is when that figurine is from.
Wow.
So clearly some native carved that. That's what.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So there's things like that. There's artifacts like that all over the country. Even, and this is going to get controversial somewhat, but there's places in the
I think we're past that.
Yeah, I know. In the America Southwest, for example, there's a site called Hovenweep, where there are what have been labeled as traditional plebeian circular structures that are almost like kivas, but they're on top of cliff faces that have been ascribed to the plebeian culture there. However, they're built in the exact same way as the Newport Tower and as in the Templar towers in Europe, which seem to suggest that those were probably Templar Constructions as well, as they were over here. And there's a lot of things like that. Some of them controversial, some of them not so controversial. But definitely there's Templar carvings on stones all over the East Coast that have been found. There is stuff in the America Southwest, artifacts that have been found. Scott Walter has done a great job at trying to catalog these things. He put a lot of them on his show on the History Channel when he had his show America Unearthed. But he also has them in his books. Scott is a member of my order. So that's all he does is try to document these connections.
You got to connect us too at some point.
Absolutely, no problem. He'd love to come on your show. I can make that happen.
All right, awesome, great,
100%.
Great.
But again, these things are all over North America, and it's just people haven't looked at them that way. But once you know they're there and you start seeing them all, you see the pattern. And these were all left over from pretty much from the 1200s to the mid 1300s, when Templars were bringing stuff over here, and they're cataloging everything, and they were bringing this knowledge back. So,
incredible.
Yeah.
It definitely connects a lot of dots when you start to think about the story of history that we're told and that we, most people subscribe to, without knowing even who the Templars were. Now, you come in and explain some of the history of your organization. It connects a lot of things.
It's the history behind the history. That's the way I like to put it. I mean, we're studying the effects of it. But rarely do we understand the causes behind what was behind it.
Fascinating. And the cross itself has symbolism embedded in it, the vertical and the horizontal.
So it's an equal armed cross. The Templar cross is equal armed, and it's because the vertical arm represented the spiritual, and the horizontal arm represented the physical, or the material.
Love that.
And so they were trying to spiritualize the material and materialize the spiritual. And the only way you can do that is through consciousness, which is the uniting element in both. And so Templars have always been concerned with, okay, how do we get to a point where we're uniting the spiritual and the physical? You could say between the spiritual and the scientific, because the scientific is really about studying matter, and the uniting thing of that is consciousness. Both the individual consciousness and the collective consciousness, and it's all about getting to that point, and that's why we believe future technology is going to be based on uniting those things and developing technologies that have consciousness interface. And we think that's what the UFOs, let me pull in UFO into here, we think that's what how they operate. I'm going to have Ryan Bledsoe on the show. His father is Chris Bledsoe. I'm sure I'll get Chris on at some point too. But me and Ryan just started talking, and they are UFO experiencers, and Chris, I don't know if you've seen, if you know about Chris, if you've read his book or seen his show on, I guess it's, I think it's maybe the History Channel. But he's been studied by NASA. He's been studied by the government. He brings them down.
He brings them down. And he can do it at will. And he's had his brain hooked up to scans, it shows that he goes into this deep meditative state of essentially no mind and peace and calm, and then he connects with them, and he knows where they're going to appear before they appear there. And this has been documented, I mean, by various people that have gone out, camera crews, and people come away just absolutely blown away. So he's about the most credible witness that there is, and he has an abduction story from 2007 that kind of started this. He had a couple of out-of-body experiences as a child, and I don't know if, who knows if there's a connection there or not, but he was shot in the back and almost died when he was a kid, and a couple other very traumatic experiences. But that seems to be I know Stephen Greer of course, is another one that I know you're familiar with now.
Used to do work with him back in the 90s.
Okay, yeah. I had the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies on a couple of weeks back, and they actually debunked CE5, and so
they debunked it.
They debunked it. He was actually those. Now, who called in the airplane that dropped the flares is as a mystery. Nobody knows, but those were flares in CE.
Oh, wow.
In CE5 specifically. Yeah. So
that's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Yeah, and that shouldn't discredit some of his other work, you know, or some of the earlier stuff. But
I can say that his process is very similar to one that the order has passed down for centuries, and in which, you know, we have literally. We have diagrams, you know, from the 1500s, you know, depicting UFOs.
Right.
We have paintings, you know, from the early 1600s depicting UFOs that were made by our order.
You have them in your possession.
We do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And have they been seen by the public?
Yes. I don't think they know what they're seeing yet. I mean, but and I can get you some photos of that as well. But I think. And we also have a document in our possession that we're gonna. It's a book from the Torah that hasn't been widely known about. You know, it's never been published until recently. We're in the process of getting it out there, called the Book of the Wars of the Lord. And this particular text talks about UFO interaction with. What we would definitely recognize as UFO or UAP interaction with humans, you know, back during biblical times.
Wow. And for non-religious people, the Torah is?
The Torah is the Old Testament, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
Jewish.
That's the Jewish, it's the Jewish Old Testament, basically.
And written just prior to the New Testament.
Correct.
Yeah, and there's the stories of interaction with UFOs in this.
There is, right? It's very clearly, that's what it's describing.
Okay.
And it's describing a battle in which the enemy was led into the water and then were basically electrocuted by this flying craft.
Wow.
You know, so that was working on the side of the Hebrews at the time. So
has this been released?
No, we are getting ready to release it.
Okay. Would that be released at the same time as the other? Or?
No, I think we're going to release it beforehand.
Good.
Like it'll be published and available within probably this year.
Wow.
So,
nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, but that element has been part of the Templar study since the beginning. And we do these exercises. We teach these exercises to our members so that they can make those connections as well. And they work really great sometimes they don't. I mean, we were in Egypt recently. Last year I had 2 different trips to Egypt, and in one of them we brought down a bunch of UFOs or UAPs at Saqqara, and everybody saw them. They were just hovering over the pyramid, and they were only there for, you know, a matter of seconds, but everyone saw them. And then the second time was at the Valley of the Kings. We had just come out of a tomb, and we brought down 3 UFOs then as well.
And what year was this approximately?
This was 2023.
Okay, so the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah,
and then what about the Saqqara?
2023.
Okay, same
year.
Okay.
Same year. Different trip. I did 2 different trips.
Okay.
We'll to this day, we still initiate people in the Great Pyramid, and we've been doing that for the last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But
well, longer, right? Didn't you mentioned Jesus?
Well, yeah, but as the Templar order, we've only been doing it for 1,000 years.
Got it.
Yeah,
Right,
I mean, we do have a text called the Levitican that talks about Jesus being initiated in Egypt, and the tradition says it was really John the Baptist was initiating him in the Great Pyramid at the time. So that's been going on for a long time. It's just the Templar Order itself has only been doing it for the last 1,000 years.
Okay, gotcha.
Only.
Right, yeah.
But so we take trips out to Egypt. We try to do it at least once a year.
Okay.
There was a period between 2011 and 2018 or so where we couldn't do anything out there because it was too unstable after the Arab Spring in 2011. But for the most part, we try to do it regularly. And anyhow, so it was this last year that we were out there. I actually did 3 trips to Egypt that year, and over 2 of them we brought down UAPs.
Wow.
So
yeah,
it's and we believe the only way that they could know that we're trying to contact them, right? Because it's not like we're using radio receivers or anything to contact them, is, again, similar type of deal. We go into that space and there's a borderline state that you get to where it's like right before you fall asleep. And it's in that area where you can drop things down and then receive information back. And we think at that area, that's really where that deep spot within ourselves is what's connected to every other living being in the universe.
Okay.
And that's a part of this collective consciousness connected with the Creator. And that if you can get to that place and then you basically send a signal out to where you are and you try to connect with these craft, they'll show up most of the time. And the only way they could know where you were is if they had some sort of consciousness technology interface that's picking up on those signals and then knowing where to go.
Or if they were so highly conscious themselves that their own minds were
picking up on it. Yeah,
they were the receivers.
Of course, quite. Yeah, exactly. So, but either way, we're talking about a much deeper mystery of consciousness, and it proves that consciousness is really not limited to the person or the being,
right?
But it's a sea of consciousness that we're tapping into, and it's a very different way of looking at how consciousness behaves than how materialistic science tends to look at it. So.
Yeah. Do you think that animals are in a conscious state of being for the most part?
I do.
Yeah.
I believe, in fact, I think some animals are more tapped into that than others. I mean, humans are obviously not there very often, or else I guess we'd see UFOs a lot more often. Right, and we'd probably be a lot more, we wouldn't be fighting with each other as much.
For sure. Yeah. I think about cats, and cats always seem to be in a state of zen. And and lizards for me, because we're in Florida here, those always seem to be just so chill and so just at peace and at one with their surroundings.
Well, and you could tell, look at a dog, when they meet a stranger, it says a lot about that person that they're meeting, usually depending on how the dog is reacting to that person. It's picking up on things that you usually don't as a person. Interesting.
The UFO phenomenon is fascinating, obviously, and it's something that I'm going to continue to explore on this podcast. Good. So, anything else on the UFO topic before we move on?
No, just that I think that the fact that they are, I would just want to re-emphasize the fact that they're tuning in with us somehow as we're trying to tune in with them, and that connection is what is allowing them to show up. I'll be honest, I used to bring them down pretty regularly.
Okay.
And then I started feeling kind of guilty for it because I was like, surely these beings have better things to do with their time than show up and entertain me, by flashing lights with me. And so I kind of stopped doing it, but I still do it every once in a while, and I appreciate the value of it. And it also suggests to me that we're not going to see a mass arrival of them until people are in the right frame of mind to connect with each other and to connect with other things out there.
Awakened, would you say?
Exactly.
Yeah,
as long as we're here fighting with each other, they really have no reason to to interact with us.
And so that's really about the ego, right? And letting go of the ego and the false self and understanding your true self and who you actually are at your core and getting in touch with that. And to get in touch with that is at the point where you might be able to connect with a higher, a more conscious being, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't even say you have to get rid of your ego. Yeah. I mean, that's a popular thing to say. The ego is not a bad thing. I mean, it's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps you from walking out in traffic and getting hit by a car, you know. But the trick is allowing the ego to be a tool of the higher self, that deeper, true self, the soul, as opposed to pulling all the energy from it and dominating. From a Templar perspective, we look at like the symbolism of Jesus riding the donkey into Jerusalem. That was a symbol of him controlling the ego. The higher self, the Christos, the Christ, was controlling the donkey. I mean, donkeys are stubborn, right? They you know, unless you're controlling them, they're going to go do whatever the heck they want. And so the higher self has to control that lower self, you know, in order to direct it to where it needs to go, as opposed to just letting it run all over. And really, this is the secret behind why in the story of Pinocchio, right, when the children go to Pleasure Island and they just start doing whatever the heck they want, what happens to them? They turn into a donkey, right? And then they become the slave to bad people, right? And that's what happens to most people in the world. So that's what happens when you allow your ego to control you, as opposed to allowing your higher nature, your higher self, to keep control of that and use it as a beast of burden to go where you need to go.
Yeah, one more question on psychedelics, maybe, and that would be: would psychedelics, from what I understand, they do dramatically reduce that portion of your brain where ego kind of comes from. And a lot of people feel as if, I mean, if you're familiar with Brian Muraresco's work and research about psychedelics in early Christianity. The journey to Eleusis in Greece, and that everyone would take back then, and written. Know Thyself was written above the oracles.
Temple of Apollo at Delphi in ancient Greece.
Right. And you know, to die before you die. If you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. And of course, that being a reference to ego, false self, and the death of that. And that journey to Eleusis is where a lot of that magic happened for people, and they would drink this special potion, and you know, it was a medicinal journey for them. So I wonder, how is our psychedelics in some way a part of the lessening of whatever that is, that unconsciousness, and in the human spiritual awakening? Can they contribute to that component of human spirituality, and ultimately potentially even be a connector between a human and more you know, the UFO phenomenon?
Yeah, we think so. We say in the ancient world, and this is going back to ancient Egypt, certainly, you know, the rites of Eleusis, of Memphis, and other places. We say that, and continuing to this day, that what we use in the Templar order, there were different stages of initiation, and they corresponded to the classical elements of earth, water, air, and fire. So earth was usually a initiation that involves some use of psychedelics, some sort of earth-based plant, and there was a preparation, an alchemical preparation for it, so that when the person ingested it, they had a complete change of consciousness, a change of perception. This was the first time they recognized that there was more to the world than they thought there was. Right? And it redefined who they were as a person at that point. Right? They knew that reality wasn't as fixed as they thought it was.
A lot of illusions became revealed as illusions.
Exactly. Exactly. So that was kind of like the first stage of awakening. The next stage then involved what was known as like a baptism by water.
Okay.
And water represented the emotions. So and it was learning to, and it represented the passions, like that will knock you to and fro and put you in a torrent of, of whatever. Emotions are an energy that need to be harnessed. And if you don't harness them, they will control you. This is where expressions like drowning in my emotions come from. Right? So symbolically, to walk on water, they didn't believe that people were actually walking on water. It just meant stabilizing your emotions. So that you could use them to prop you up. Right? So it was using the emotions as an energy for transformation, as opposed to drowning in them. So this was the second stage of things. The next stage then was associated with air, which had to do with things of the mind and consciousness. I mean, all you have to do is hold your breath long enough, you're going to go unconscious, right?
Sure.
So air was tied in with consciousness. It was also believed there was a vital component in the air, which the Eastern traditions referred to as chi or ki. The Western traditions referred to as a symbolic mercury. But really what it was the nature of consciousness and what are the arts and sciences that are expressions of that. And so this is where the 7 liberal arts and sciences were developed out of. And it was believed that if you understood these things, they drew a map and how they were all related and how they all go back to some sort of universal consciousness. And so the point of studying these things wasn't just to memorize a bunch of facts. It was to show how there's an order to the universe that's dictated by a universal consciousness. And the more we get back to that point, the more whole we're going to be as a person. So somewhere along the line at that point, in order to fully realize the universal consciousness, one had to symbolically die to the lower self that was just attached to the material. So there was usually a initiation rite that involved a symbolic death and raising of the candidate. And if it was done right with this concept of air and the vital component and creating the right ritual space and everything else, the candidate would have an out-of-body experience. And by having that out-of-body experience, they realized that they are not just their physical body, and that there was some other part of themselves that could survive after death, and that who we really are is something much bigger than just our physical form. And so you don't need to be afraid of death anymore at that point, right? You can actually create change in the world. Who cares if they kill you? You're just going to come back.
Right.
I mean, there's something preserved. And this was the first step towards enlightenment or gnosis, divine experiential knowledge that you could tap into. So then the last stage of initiation was that of fire. And it usually involved, it recognized that fire, that light, was the active component that was bringing about the transformation to begin with. And that by tuning into that, we become an agent of that, of transformation in the world itself. And so this was the journey of the initiate, and it still is that journey within any Templar mystery tradition. And any other mystery tradition out there that came from that same Atlantean source. They have the exact same pattern of how they do things. And they have this exact same secret hand grip that they're given at the end of it. And that's how they're all able to recognize each other. Like, oh, okay, we all come from the same tradition. We're all passing on the same ideas. We're all trying to develop human consciousness to its greatest potential, so that it's in harmony with the universal order. You know, so that we can build these stable structures, so that we can help humanity and all sentient beings on our planet achieve their greatest potential, which is what we're here to do. But until we wake up to that, we're prisoners here. And we don't even realize it. You know? And we do things to each other that keep us prisoners here. And we're not going to be going and journeying through the stars and other things that I think is our ultimate destiny. So.
Right. Yeah, we would be going there to escape ourselves here.
Right, exactly.
We would be trying to find safety on another. Yeah, as opposed to heaven being here, being now. Yeah, being balanced.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were given this Eden. This planet is our Eden. You know, all these animals and everything else. We were told it's our responsibility to take care of them. Well, are we doing that? No, we're not. And in fact, we're totally destroying it all right now. And it's troubling. So this is part of why it's so important that these ideas are being spread now. Because if we don't, we're going to destroy ourselves. And I don't think anyone's going to come to save us.
No. You know,
why would they?
How could they?
How could they?
Yeah, they would have to annihilate us to save us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to pull ourselves up in order to make that happen.
Unless it's through knowledge, but knowledge exists within us, and it exists all around us here now. We don't need, you know. So I think that knowledge is necessary for the next step of human evolution, which is of course a spiritual evolution as opposed to a physical evolution. And the time to get there is now. Yeah,
I agree.
Sure. Yeah. So are there people within the Templar? Are there members of the Knights Templar that have different points of view and perspective? I know you're the boss. You set the tone at the top, you know. But I mean, is there there's always, it seems like within any entity there's going to be some
disagreements.
Yeah. What's that picture like?
There are, you know, sometimes there's disagreements in I don't want to say doctrine. We don't really have a doctrine, but we do say, look, here's the research, here's the evidence. Here's the experiments, do it for yourself, scientific method. And if it works, what does that say about you? What does that say about your consciousness? What does it say about the universe? The conclusions of that may vary somewhat. And I would say there are also a number of groups out there that claim to be Knights Templar who aren't at all.
Okay.
I mean, a good example of that is you go down to Central America, there's an entire drug cartel that refers to themselves as the Knights Templar. I remember one of the first times I went down to speak in Colombia, I was in Bogota, Colombia, and they were announcing all over the radio waves that, you know, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar was coming to speak. And they announced when it would be, and like, you know, hundreds of people showed up from all over. And I remember when someone raising their hand to ask a question, and I was like, yes. And they said, is this, are you really the head of the drug cartel down here? And I thought, what?
That's hilarious.
No. That's totally different thing. They, you know, they just thought they thought of Templars as crusaders, like some do, and they thought that was a cool idea. So they applied it to their drug cartel, but it has, you know, they have nothing to do with actual Templar work. And there are other groups too that, you know, like our Roman Catholic fraternities that are like, they see the Templars as, oh, they were this rough crusading group, you know, for the Roman Church, even though that's not even true. And so, but that's how they try to sell themselves as now. So, so you have to be a little careful anytime you see the word Templar now, you know, what it is. But
But and then are there any members within the Templar that are not happy with you taking a public stance and bringing some of this information to light for?
Yeah, I mean, we have members that are excited about it. Some people are afraid of me bringing it forward.
Okay.
There's some people that are concerned, understandably, that if the world gets so caught up in the artifacts, they're going to miss the spiritual message and teachings that we're trying to pass on too, with this idea of consciousness and who we really are, what we're really connected with, how that connects with UAPs and everything else. That's what they're more concerned about. They don't care about artifacts from 2,000 years ago, or that we could recreate today, or that could be, it's like, great, okay, we have these arcs. That's a cool technology that was passed on from ancient Egypt, but we could create the same thing today. Why don't we create it? That's kind of where they're coming from. They get worried that we get so caught up in the religious artifacts that people miss the deeper spiritual message of where we need to be going as people, and that's it's a valid critique. And so, we kind of try to do a dance with, as we're revealing the stuff to the public, we're also trying to look back and say, okay, well, if these things are true, then it must mean that this interpretation from the Bible is not true, or is it needs to be looked at in a different way.
Right.
And and that explains the why as to why we started looking at the Bible different ways, and not just the Bible, but other religious texts as well. People think of Templars as Christian, even though we're not. We have people from all different faiths. But we do celebrate the mysteries of the New Testament and the mysteries of the Torah from a mystical perspective. And it's because it's the mystical perspective that ties it into consciousness. And that's what we're really concerned about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and to have that be your goal and your purpose, to spread consciousness and true consciousness, not dogma that's confused with consciousness, but true consciousness. You have to have a platform, and you have to have a voice that reaches a lot of people.
Right.
And in order to do that, you can't just be somebody who comes out of nowhere and says consciousness is important. You kind of have to show people, what you have and
exactly and where it comes from.
Yeah,
for sure. It's kind of like you can give them the. It's like Mary Poppins. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Right.
I mean, you have to give them the thing that they're. The sensationalized thing that's going to get attention, so that then they become they have permission to look at the other stuff deeper, and that's really all life's about when you think about it. I've told this to a lot of people, but we spend our lives looking to leaders to give us permission to accept certain things.
Right.
And when you start talking about matters of faith and you start talking about spirituality,
two different things. Spirituality and faith are two different things.
Totally different things.
Yeah.
But in both instances, people are looking to leaders for permission to look at this differently.
Right.
And part of it's because we spend our entire lives being conditioned to only see things in certain boxes. So to take people out of those boxes is a scary thing for people. And you have to remember too that most of the fighting in the world comes from people attaching their ego to things that really have nothing to do with them.
Right.
I mean, you look at like the fighting with political parties here in the United States. What happens is people attach themselves to a particular party or a particular candidate. And then if that party or that candidate is threatened in any way, they go into fight or flight mode, right? Because their ego is attached to it. And so they're trying to defend themselves because their ego is threatened.
Right.
And so we have to get past that way.
Becoming conscious is the ability to observe that and to understand that, where we do have those attachments, whether it's a nationality, a religion, a race, an organization, a political party, a football team. It's that.
It's all the above. Yeah.
My car,
it's attaching the ego to something outside of yourself that really doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, if it was, if you didn't have your ego attached to it, you wouldn't care.
Right. You would still be you.
And what politicians in particular, and I grew up, my father was a politician. He was in politics my entire life. He went from being a state legislature to a mayor of one of the largest cities in the U.S. But it was so I grew up watching politics very closely. And what politicians do is they're very good at getting people to attach their ego to something that they wouldn't normally care about. And the politician's job is to get them to care about it, and then say, I'm the representative for this.
Creating separation.
Creating it. And then that way, when that's threatened or the politician is threatened, the person goes into fight or flight mode, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's what's causing division in this country.
And in the world.
The world.
Yeah, it's how we get support for wars.
Right.
And for,
exactly.
For every, it's all about division, divide and conquer.
Right.
Yeah, so it's great. I think the mission is fantastic to spread awareness for true consciousness and true understanding of consciousness. So, I certainly applaud what you are doing.
Thank you.
I think it's important, very important work, and it's necessary work at this point. When you look at you can turn on the nightly news and see, what we're doing and the amount of violence and negativity and hatred and defending of a false self, a false, it's getting to the point where the weapons and the things that we're fighting with are so much farther advanced than our consciousness that we're 5-year-olds playing with nuclear weapons.
Well, our technology has outpaced our spirituality.
No doubt.
And if we don't get that under control, we're going to destroy ourselves.
100%.
And the planet.
Yep. 100%.
I mean, the planet will survive in the long run, but we won't, and a lot of animals and others. Things will probably go too as a result of it.
For sure, yeah. It'll eventually get back to balance, but it would be nice to preserve our civilization given the fact that we have learned a lot over the last several thousand years.
Well, and you consider it's taken us 12,000 years to get back to the point where we probably were before the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. In fact, I would argue that they are probably a little more advanced than we are today.
Well,
back then.
Certainly spiritually, technologically, in different ways.
Different ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I would hate to see us, mess it up again and then, take another 12,000 years for us to get back to that.
That would be a shame.
Again. Yeah,
that would be a shame. Yeah, for sure. So, what is the plan in terms of? And I asked you, just briefly earlier, but now you've mentioned that there will be a release later on this year, and that within the next 5 to 10 years, the big releases will happen. So, what do you have a plan in terms of what information you'll be releasing by time period? I think people would be super interested in that.
Yeah, well, so one of the first things we're going to be doing is releasing texts related to not only texts that we found, like the Book of the Wars of the Lord being one of them, but then also our own. We have journal entries, we have ship logs, we have diaries documenting this entire history that we're talking about here. We even know where there's shipwrecks. There's Templar shipwrecks that had gone down that we want to reveal at some point. Just to show and to prove and to cover the tracks of, okay, this was how this came about, so that there's no question there on that front. Then, and we're looking at doing all that within the next 2 years.
Okay.
And then what we want to do is we want to open one of the vaults, and we want to make some of those artifacts available for study. We do have 2 vaults right now in the United States. There are other vaults in other parts of the world that contain other things. but the majority of the stuff is over here in the United States now. And, we want to open one of the vaults at least and start to make that available. And then see what people do with it.
Yeah.
And then based on how that goes, we'll open the other vault. But if it doesn't go well, then we still have the other vault where we have stuff preserved. So
give away a bone at a time for study. Don't give away all the bones at one time. You'll never get them back.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll never hear from them again. Give away just a tiny bone for study here and there.
Yeah,
And again, my vase offer still stands if you want to trade.
Well, and you have to. We have to provide you have to provide. People have to have an appreciation for what they're seeing too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like your vase collection.
Yeah.
If you know what you're looking at, there's such a profound mystery there.
Yeah.
That is so deep and speaks directly to this entire thing we're talking about right now.
Yep.
But if you don't have an appreciation for it, it's just another pot.
It's just a rock. Yeah.
Just another ancient pot. Okay, so it's made out of stone instead of
clay.
Yeah,
whatever.
So what? Who cares?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's you have to build an appreciation for. People need to know what they're seeing, so that they can appreciate it, and that's what's going to change the world. And unfortunately, I don't think people are getting smarter. They tend to be getting more and more. Their energy and time tends to be getting more and more sucked into superficial things. There's just not the level of study and appreciation of our history and our world and our arts and sciences as there used to be. I mean, and so it's even that much more of a hurdle to get people to appreciate what they're looking at. Some of the things I'm saying right now, if I had said them 20 years ago to the average person, they would have been...
You'd have been burned at the stake.
Yeah, either burnt at the stake or they would have been totally sucked in and like, you can't tell this to anyone,
Yeah.
Now we're living in a world where no one really cares.
Yeah.
So it's either...
It's true.
It's either the people who do care very deeply.
Right.
But the masses just don't appreciate it.
Right.
I can say, oh well, Templars discovered, we're over here in the Americas, 200 years before Columbus.
Yeah.
And if you said that 10 years ago, people would be like, what? And they'd either be real excited about it or really offended by it.
Yeah. That's one of the least shocking things you've said.
Right,
actually.
Exactly. But today, like no one cares.
No,
they're like, oh well, the Vikings were here too. It's like, they were.
Right,
probably a bunch of other cultures too. The Egyptians were here, the Chinese were here, So I was just leading a tour down in the Yucatan a couple weeks ago, and I was taking them down to the Chichen Itza area, and everyone goes to the main pyramid, which is beautiful, but off of the way of the main pyramid, there's kind of a little path that you can take back to these other temples. And what's really fascinating about these other temples is they have elephants depicted on them.
Okay.
And there's a figure that looks like Buddha cross-legged on front of the temple, and it looks and suggests that it's very much an Asian thing, and to me that's amazing, right? Because there's no elephants down there.
Right,
I mean, so that the standard archaeologists say, oh, it's probably some weird looking bird or something. And they don't even try to explain the Buddha, looking figure. But again, it suggests who were the cultures that had jade mass. It was the Mayans and it was the Chinese. There's probably a connection there. But archaeologists won't look at that. But if I say that today, people aren't. It's not that surprising to people, but if I were to say that 10 years ago, that would have been considered heresy.
Right.
So things change, people's opinions change, And it's just getting people to recognize and appreciate what it is you're actually revealing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming down. I know you got a plane to catch.
I do. But it's been a great discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it as well. Very eye-opening and enlightening. And I think your cause is a great one. And so I just encourage you to keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep getting the word out there. And I'd be happy to have you back on the show at some point in time.
Great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd love it. Thank you so much.
Good. Yeah. And what I'm going to start doing as a tradition is just giving a little gift to my guests.
Gift bag?
Yeah. Do it on do it at the end of the show.
Cool. What do we got here?
Yeah, there's a couple cool things in there for you. So.
Oh, that is the coolest cup.
It's a great cup.
This is already my favorite cup.
Awesome.
That is awesome. Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, those are great.
I love it.
Yep. A book which you and a vase. Yeah.
Very cool.
That's the thin-walled artifact.
It's a replica of the.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, 2 millimeters thick on a granite wall.
Probably more breakable than the original.
Probably, maybe true. Maybe true.
But,
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, you probably.
Fantastic book.
You probably already have it, but
yeah. You can't. You need to have multiple copies of this because you're always going to be giving it away.
I agree. Yeah, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Then there's a little Bell's gift card in there for you. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
The perfect store.
Yep.
For everything you didn't know you needed.
Right. Yeah, or your wife didn't know you needed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again. Can't thank you enough for your time and your knowledge that you spread on today's episode. So,
well, I wish you the best of luck. Keep doing this.
Thank you.
There's a lot to get out there, and anything I can help you with, just let me know.
I appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate that. Great. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Yep. Awesome.
Great.
I don't think that could have been any better, honestly. Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
We did.
It was good.